It is now my pleasure to welcome Dr. Jeffrey Nall. Dr. Nall teaches courses in humanities and philosophy at the University of Central Florida. And you can also see his Substack, which is great. You should read it, Humanities in Revolt. Dr. Jeffrey Nall, welcome. We're going to talk today about quiet joys amidst the apocalypse. Please welcome.
The post-apocalyptic film A Quiet Place made its debut in 2018. If you could go to the next one. Directed by John Krasinski, best known as Jim from The Office. I'm sure many of you have seen. A Quiet Place was unique in more ways than one. The movie, first of all, eschewed the gratuitous violence that's fairly typical of the horror genre. It gave us rich characters that were working through very real and relatable interpersonal conflict, including some of those that we've actually heard of today, grieving the loss of a loved one, of a child in particular. It was also surprisingly true to its name. It was a monster movie that was, well, very quiet. If you go to the next slide. So what happens in A Quiet Place? Well, sightless aliens equipped with seemingly impervious skin and super hearing have taken over the planet, leaving small bands of human beings left to fend for themselves in a relative state of social disorder. You could be forgiven for thinking that I've just outlined the recent political climate, but in any case, I don't want to digress. In the first two movies, the Abbott family, shown in part here, relies on American Sign Language, also various forms of nonverbal quiet communication, and some really innovative survival techniques to try and, well, survive. You go to the next one. The third film in the series, A Quiet Place Day One, which is the one I'll be talking to you about today, was released just last year. Day One is a prequel, giving us a glimpse at the sheer madness of the aliens' arrival to Earth and the hard lessons that the New Yorkers, in particular, have to learn about these aliens and their deadly hearing abilities. As prior chapters of the film did, Day One gives viewers more than an action-packed, edge-of-your-seat jump scare kind of monster movie. We also get rich representation of the intrinsic joys of life that we so often, perhaps accidentally or unintentionally, numbly overlook in our narrow concentration on possessions and on the future, what comes next. Day One reminds us to live for the ends and not merely the means of life. It shows us that fulfillment is found in states of being, more on what I mean by that in a moment, not those ruled by objects, not a life ruled by a clock. Next slide. Most disaster or alien invasion films, as those of you interested in this sort of disaster genre will know, are focused on survival. The characters are presented with the challenge of preventing either the total destruction of human civilization and even sometimes the entire planet. And they have to worry about things like aliens or an asteroid, maybe a comet, the Earth's malfunctioning core, or in the instance of geostorm, the malevolent use of climate-controlling satellites. I don't know, maybe Elon Musk's next endeavor, if this whole thing doesn't work out for him. Day One is not narrowly concerned, by contrast, with survival or averting catastrophe. This is a movie that takes up questions that those of us interested in philosophy and religion and spiritual inquiry will be all too familiar with. It asks us questions like, why is life worth living in the first place? What is so good and beautiful in this world of hardship that makes it worth surviving at all? Day One's protagonist, Sam, short for Samira, is terminally ill with cancer and living in a hospice facility. While Sam, played by the actress Lupita Nyong'o, isn't exactly rushing into the jaws of death the interesting part of this movie is that she's not exactly fleeing in terror from them either. Her cancer diagnosis and now this impending death has made her numb to living and resigned to death. But this disposition changes, strangely, ironically, when an apocalyptic alien invasion interrupts a reluctant trip into the city. She's headed out to the city with her fellow hospice patients, and of all things, they're going to see what turns out to be a very ominous puppet show, of all things. And as aliens begin raining down on New York City, unleashing death and destruction and chaos, Sam decides that it's now or never to, well, get pizza. Her caretaker and her friend at the hospice center, Ruben, basically is pretty convinced that she has to be kidding. This is like obviously a joke. People are dying all around her. And she ends up communicating through pad and pen that no, she's deadly serious and she's going into Harlem to get herself some pizza. And he can't dissuade her from doing otherwise. Now, on her seemingly nihilistic journey, Sam meets Erich, played by Joseph Quinn, next slide, of Hellfire Club and Stranger Things fame. We meet Erich as he emerges from a sunken subway staircase, as though reborn or escaping a kind of a watery tomb. He emerges from this staircase gasping for air, in a state of panic before he feels this calm come over him as he spots the kitties that Beth was introducing to us earlier, where he meets Frodo, Frodo being Sam's support cat. Erich is a law student from the UK who finds himself utterly alone in the Big Apple at the very moment he most needs family and most needs friends. His panic is soon replaced by curiosity and bemusement. Again, amidst this absolutely apocalyptic reign of aliens, and he finds himself following Frodo through this besieged city. And of course, he soon discovers that Frodo isn't just out for a stroll, but is actually returning to the caretaker. If you go to the next slide. And while the cat Frodo seems to have a soft spot for strays like Erich, Samara does not have that same interest. She tries to send Erich away. She's heading out for what we can only describe as some doomsday pizza and an apparently expedited appointment with death. She seems to want to get the thing over with. At least that's how it seems at the beginning. She gesticulates for Erich to go in her opposite direction. She wants to be left alone. And when they get a little closer, because remember, the more you talk, the quicker you die. When he gets a little closer, she emphatically whispers for him to go to the ships. There's a set of ships. They're coming. They're going to take all of the human beings out onto what we, I guess can consider a kind of a set of lifeboats, to avoid the land besieged by this alien horde. And Erich essentially decides, no, apparently he needs a friend more than he needs to be safe and secure. A consequential decision that I think gives the attentive movie viewer pause and reason to contemplate. Erich makes up his mind that he is going to help Sam get that pizza, whatever reason she has for wanting this pizza in the first place. And specifically, he's going to help her get pizza at Patsy's Pizzeria. Go to the next one. The bad news is that Patsy's Pizzeria is all out of fresh pizza due to having been burnt to a crisp, not just the pizza, but the whole place. The good news is that Luetta's Jazz Club, where Sam's father used to play piano, still stands. It's here at the Jazz Club, this seemingly, you might say, on a superficial level, inconsequential part of the movie, where this film displays its soul and gives us so much to think about. In this image, it turns out that the pizzeria is actually like a real place, and so that's it. You could go there now. Not right now, at least wait till the service is over. So day one reminds us time is not our possession, and neither should it be our ruler. During the scene at this jazz club at Luetta's, the filmmakers pause the harrowing action and give the characters time to eat and drink, connect, and to just play. Play amidst an apocalypse? What foolishness, right? We feel as though, watching the film, that time is suspended, or that at least it's not being tracked the way that we typically track it. The characters get to dip their toes into the warm and immersive waters of the present, a state of consciousness and creative alignment or at one-ment with life. Here, the film illustrates Erich Fromm's contention that we mistakenly characterize eternity as indefinitely prolonged time. Next slide. In his book, To Have or To Be, Fromm wrote, "The experience of loving, of joy, of grasping truth does not occur in time, but in the here and now." End quote. We experience eternity, Fromm teaches us, when we indulge our most cherished values and delight in our fullest humanity, our faculties of thought and feeling, creativity, our responsiveness to others, to life. Quote, "The here and now is eternity," Fromm wrote, i.e., timelessness. We give birth to timelessness through our participation in the present. Now, inside the jazz club, Sam reveals that her mission for pizza had almost nothing to do with pizza. The real mission was to feel close to her father, who passed away before her own terminal diagnosis, and prematurely, I should add. Her father would bring her to his performances at the club and then take her for pizza at Patsy's afterwards. At Patsy's, at Luetta's, Sam's cold, stiff, and crumpled up memories, they stretch out, they become reanimated, and they grow nimble. Her experiences with her father from the past are liberated of time's oppressive grip and return to her as though they were alive in her present. She runs her fingers quietly, because remember, noise equals death in this movie. She quietly runs her fingers over the piano keys, maybe the very same piano keys that her father once pressed to bring joyful music to his audience. Standing in that silent and empty jazz club, she once again experiences her father's beautiful music. She sees his wide smile and feels the warmth of his presence, even though, of course, he is no longer with her. More than memories, these are intrinsically precious joys that make living good. Narrowly centering our lives around sentimental memories, we should be clear. Sentimental memories and pure reflections on our past, what Bruce Springsteen called glory days, as you may recall. This betrays the life that it ostensibly glorifies when we live only in the past and only in reminiscence. Those who live today exclusively on the stale and often distorted nostalgia of the past betray opportunities to live presently. But the key caveat here is that we can also bring the past, wrote Fromm, into the present. He wrote, "One can experience a situation of the past with the same freshness as if it occurred in the here and now. That is, one can recreate the past, bring it to life, resurrect the dead, symbolically speaking. To the extent that one does so, the past ceases to be the past. It is here and now." There's the biggest difference in the world between someone who forsakes the present, pining mournfully about that which does not exist, and someone who brings the past alive, energetically and joyfully into the present. That is the difference. So when Sam enlivens her memories, Erich, undeterred by the destruction of the pizza place, sets out on a brief and undisclosed mission to find that pizza, to complete his friend's experience, and he succeeds. He salvages an entire it's from a different pizza joint, but anyway, it's nearby. He gets an entire pizza, and he returns to Luetta's, and then he approaches Sam turning his back to her pretty sweetly, like clearly he's got a pizza and he's like he writes Patsy's on it to sort of like play the game, and he presents it to her. And she knows that it's not the pizza that her father used to get her, but it really is the thought that counts in this instance. And she's all too happy to sink her teeth into a slice and to pretend it's the real thing. Sam's first bite tells us all we need to know about apocalyptic pizza and how long it's been sitting out. It's as bad as you would imagine, you know? Cold cheese, people, it doesn't stretch. So what's the point? And cold pizza doesn't resurrect the dead either. But what it can do, even at its stalest, is bring us into the present if we are mindful. And so the two friends contentedly chew through this cold 2 or 3 day old pizza, washing it down with shared whiskey or some other amber spirit. And after all, the richness of the experience has almost nothing to do with pizzas or jazz clubs or other things. The richness is born of the experience and the enlivening memories of her beloved father. Now, of course, Sam and Erich in this film would rather not be hiding out from bloodthirsty extraterrestrials hell-bent on devouring humans. It's safe to assume they'd both jump at the opportunity to throw their pizza in a microwave or throw their bodies in some cold, warm showers. Yet they refuse to be oppressed by circumstances beyond their control. There was a joy to be had, I think we can all do well to recall in our present moment, in all of our trying tribulations. There is joy to be had, even amidst the chaos of whatever we're going through now, even when our prospects for altering those conditions are not good. Life is, after all, a kind of a death sentence. Time will eventually run out for all of us. But day one joins many great thinkers of the past to defiantly challenge us to appreciate the small joys of the present that we once longed for. It joins the ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus, if you go to the next one, in reprimanding the grass is greener thinking that so many of us engage in, overlooking the good in our present life only to yearn for the past or what is yet and indeed may never come. As Epicurus put it, don't spoil what you have by desiring what you don't have, but remember that what you now have was once the things only hoped for, end quote. And this is an old idea that has been repeated in equally eloquent terms again and again. Sam and Erich do not make this mistake at Luetta's. They are at least satisfied with the experience of friendship, reprieve from alien terror, and some small satisfaction of their hunger. This jazz scene affirms that eternity is indeed at the tip of our fingers. After eating pizza, Erich spots a pack of cards left at the club. Determined to extend their silent revelry, he takes to the stage in dramatic fashion at the club, pulling Sam up to assist with a magic trick. She selects a card, Erich blends them together, and then miraculously, of course, reveals the very card that she had, ostensibly unbeknownst to him, secretly chosen. The two bow before an audience of empty chairs, their inaudible laughter radiating through wide, teethy smiles. Day one is a film where almost all of the acting is done, not in reciting scripted lines, but in expressing thought and feeling in body language and facial expressions. Fromm argued that we humans often fall prey to a kind of linguistic idolatry, you might call it, whereby we let words do our thinking and do our feeling for us, losing sight of the prioritization of the experience that gives rise to those words so that we can name and talk about those experiences. Quote, the words are vessels that are filled with experiences that overflow the vessels. The experience always overflows the words we give to them. As we watch the characters of day one prioritize experience over wordy explication, something I'm guilty of in this very moment, quite ironically, we're reminded to live not only in language, but in our bodies and in our hearts. So, A Quiet Place is not primarily about aliens or pizza or even unannounced magic shows. It's not even mainly about survival, and that's what I love so much about this film. This is a story of two people who respond to the threat of annihilation by an alien invasion or whatever we happen to be facing by exemplifying what Erich Fromm described as the being mode of life, a concept that resounds the perennial insight that human fulfillment is not to be found in the possessions of objects, in what Fromm also describes as the having mode. In his book, next slide, To Have or to Be, what I think is maybe one of the most profound texts I've ever encountered. I wish I had encountered it earlier, but I'm glad to have encountered it now. Fromm drew on profound philosophical and spiritual works spanning the globe to identify and analyze two fundamental orientations of life, one primarily based on having and the other based on being. Now, in the having mode of existence, our lives center on the possessions of things. We experience life passively in the having mode, rather than seeking to prioritize the fullest flowering of each and every one of our humanities through the activation and the growth of that which is truly specific to our human condition, our capacity for reason, our ability for creativity, our capacity for love, our character. Instead, in the having mode, we invest our life in seeking approval of or control over others, and we pursue money and we pursue material possessions. In the having mode, we numbly resign ourselves to taking in whatever life presents without active, enlivened thought or creativity. We treat life like a stale routine, a rerun of a show we watch just to pass, or as we like to say, kill the time. Our contributions to life are perfunctory, they're trite, they're mechanistic, they're premeditated. Next slide. There's perhaps no clearer portrait of the having mode than the documentarian, we might call them, tourist. The tourist who documents the food and the art and the natural beauty and the historical sites so that they can preserve and recollect the sights and the sounds, so that they can preserve the experience, which ironically they were not fully present for because they were too busy documenting that which they ostensibly were motivated to seek out. When we are in the being mode of living, by contrast, our lives and identities are defined in relation to our character and our conscious and conscientious participation in the objective world rather than obsession with things and possessions. A life of being, Fromm teaches us, entails enlivening, growing, and sharing our dynamic human potential, whatever that looks like for each of us. Specifically, our potential for rational thought, yes, and creativity and autonomy and loving communion with the wider world beyond our own egos. To be in this regard, Fromm wrote, means, quote, to renew oneself, to grow, to flow out, to love, to transcend the prison of one's isolated ego, to be interested, to list, to give, end quote. Next slide. In the being mode of living, we cease to experience ourselves and the world as a useful procedural step towards some distant objective, some vanishing horizon that moves us one step closer to it. Instead, in the being mode, we experience the value of the world and ourselves for our own sake. In the being mode, quote, time is dethroned, Fromm explained. It is no longer the idol that rules our life. This does not mean we magically exist outside of time. The point, rather, is that when we are in the being mode, we refuse to permit time's alienating interference in our most cherished experiences. We don't let it rule us. Next slide. The true heroism of day one's main characters has nothing to do with defeating aliens like this or evading catastrophe. It's that they refuse to be ruled by such things or time itself. Sam and Erich exemplify the being state of existence even as they confront the inescapable reality of human mortality in the most direct and visceral way, namely murderous monsters who are occasioned to eat people from the face down. Not something I'm sure any of us are interested in. Next slide. By being, explained Fromm, I refer to the mode of existence in which one neither has anything nor craves to have something, but is joyous, employs one's faculties productively, is one to the world, end quote. Though the film initially turns on Sam's peculiar hunger for pizza, we eventually learn that neither she nor Erich wants anything. That's what makes this movie so interesting. They don't want anything. The desires that they prize are existential. It's not a trivial fact that, for example, Erich performs his magic in tattered slacks and a dingy shirt and tie. We don't even learn of his capabilities until he spots the cards and launches into this impromptu performance. Even if in desperate and desolate conditions, his internal vibrancy of spirit, his character, spontaneously shines forth. Erich is strangely prepared for the end of the world precisely because his identity is rooted in being rather than having. Day one's protagonists, Sam and Erich, respond to the alien apocalypse much like the man who was said to have encountered a tiger while walking through a field. This next slide, please. As the Zen Buddhist story relays, a man once encountered a tiger, did his best to outrun the animal. Wonder if you've heard this before. When he came to the edge of a precipice that was too high up to simply jump down from, he grabbed hold of a vine and climbed away from the tiger. Frightened, the man surveyed his options and discovered that he was not only caught beneath one very hungry tiger, but also dangling above yet another. To make matters worse, two mice, one black and one white, began eating through the very vine which was holding him up. Just then, realizing the game is essentially over, the man recognized that there was this beautiful red strawberry sitting serendipitously within his reach. Refusing to allow the tigers, mice, and circumstances of life that are beyond his control to dictate his last moments, he reached out to delight on the berry, and he exclaimed how sweet it tasted just as he died. And the berry is, of course, the beauty of life amidst inescapable and sometimes unresolvable hardship, the sweetness that accompanies the bitterness. Neither the point of day one, to close, neither the point of day one nor the Zen story about the strawberry endorse nihilistic abandonment of life, nor feckless resignation to bad circumstances. They're not about giving up and not trying. Instead, they invite us to ask how best to live lives as precariously wedged between life and death. Part of the answer, I think, is to guard against being subsumed in of a life centered on accumulation and the mere manipulation of beings and objects for some ever forestalled goal, to affirm the goodness of being, of creative, attentive aliveness to the world, of exemplifying goodness and virtue in the present, rather than merely calculating its investment potential. To live well, I think these stories, is to do more than escape aliens or tigers. Living well means delighting in pizza or a friendship for their own sake. And I think we would all do well to keep such existentially vital insights close at hand as we confront the inescapable complexities and hard present and very likely future lives. Thank you.